I think the first question will be, um, what is your overall experience of being a PAT?
I've really enjoyed being a PAT. I've been a PAT for about 5-6 years now and watched the programme develop and been part of that programme development. But it's the contact with the students that I really enjoy. And like anybody who's been involved in education, you usually go into education because you want to make a difference to somebody's life, and as a PAT you do that, and I have really enjoyed watching and being part of somebody's development, when your students, or when my students have developed their confidence in the classroom, when they have grown into the role, when they've gained a greater understanding into being a teacher, when they've enjoyed their own academic success as they have developed and grown their confidence. I have enjoyed that. That's what I got when I was a classroom teacher, when I worked in FE, when I worked, wherever I've been involved in education. So that's sort of the part I've enjoyed. I've also enjoyed the intellectual engagement talking about education. I can talk about education and learning and teaching. It's been my career. It's still an interest, and to be able to do that as well, but not have the responsibility as the module and program leaders have of having to generate it. So that's been that, and to encourage students to intellectually engage and enjoy that, and make those connections between theory and practice, and then start appreciating their own insights and frameworks that they start working with. So it's sort of on two levels, the personal and the academic, that has made me enjoy the job. Certainly the past year, with the development of technology, has also brought in more for me, because I'm seeing students face to face, and encouraging them to be in groups. They've seen each other face to face. So the use of Teams has been quite powerful with my cohort, and I'm assuming lots of other PATs have found the same thing.
Yes, would you be able to say something about the best bits and worst bits, do you think?
The best bits about being a PAT is the relationship that you develop with the students, and again, that's about the relationship you experience as a teacher with a student, whether you're in a classroom, in terms of you have a bond of commitment to their learning, and they respond to that. And anybody who has worked, one of the thing about becoming a learner is many people come into learning taking a qualification, but don't link the qualification to actually a process of learning. And as a PAT, that's what you're doing. You're taking your students through a process of learning, and they are gaining insight into their own learning and enjoying it, and it's seeing it as a learning journey. So for me, one of the best bits, when I think back, is students who came into the program sometimes having to get the qualification because it required a job, and there were pressures there from family or social, and blossoming in terms of gaining their confidence in their intellectual capacity, and also in terms of the classroom. And this last cohort, I've had a student who I took initially as being very arrogant, who seemed to believe that they could do this easily, and struggled when faced in the classroom with a group of 8-year-olds, and has just blossomed, has had the edges rubbed off them, has engaged with the material, and has developed as a person, and seeing the last video clip of that person in the classroom totally engaged in the teaching and learning process was lovely. So that's sort of like the best bits. The worst bits is when you have students who you know are mucking about, who have missed deadlines, have come up with feeble excuses. I mean, you wouldn't believe the variations on my next door neighbour's dog's eaten my homework that you get as a pack from around the world. There's a commonality to excuses, and the worst bit is when you have to be more diplomatic than you might have been, and that again has been an opportunity that Teams has presented, because face to face and a one-to-one, there's a confidentiality of that meeting, which has allowed me to call it, if necessary, with a student. You're mucking about, you need to concentrate, you need to organize your time, you need to get your work in, you need to engage in reading. I've had a long conversation with one student about improving their writing, and it came down to the fact that they did not read. They did not read. They did not read for pleasure. They didn't read. They didn't engage. They came in from a subject that's not necessarily has that basis, and encouraging that and talking through with that. So yes, so some of the worst bits, but I can't say there's any sort of awful bits. You get the usual life's experience. This year, I haven't had anybody split from their partner. I haven't had anybody whose partner has been taken seriously ill. I have had a student who became pregnant at the start of the program and delivered her baby a week after she had submitted her final assignment. Great success, and she had managed to meet all her deadlines. Was average grades, the 70 to 75, excellent feedback on her teaching practices. And I used her as an example to someone who was moaning about, I didn't have time. And I used it as an example of how somebody else had managed their life. But yes, in past years, you do often have to support students. I've had students who have had major bereavements. I've had students whose partners have been struck suddenly very, very ill. I've had students who have gone through divorce. So you do see all experience, but I can't say, what the worst thing could be. The worst thing could be is a student not completing when they want to. The university has proved to be highly supportive and flexible. That's not to say dropping standards, but has been accommodating for students in getting through in the times of difficulty on the pandemic, when things have stopped, when curfews have come in, when vaccines aren't available, when services are cut and they can't access internet, which is happening in certain countries. So there's a lot of support. Excuse me a moment.
Which leads on really to talking about support that's available for PATs and students that the university provides, because you're saying about how supportive the university and how considerate it is of some of the personal circumstances that students encounter. So a little bit more about, if you could, about the support that you are aware of.
Yes, well, the support from the university that I have specifically promoted is certainly the library support. The e-library has proved to be extremely supportive for students and accommodating, and students have given me feedback for that. Students who are dyslexic, experience difficulties. And again, as a PAT, you have to work with them. So you have to make sure students who have difficulties in their own learning, that there is some form of barrier to their own learning, whether that is dyslexia or ADHD. You've got to promote, encourage them to hook into the university systems. This year, that has been difficult in some cases for the university, because people who provide those support have been off campus and such like, and there's been delays. But it is there. And also, I think there's becoming a greater understanding of the EAL students and the ESL students. One of the things about being a PAT on an international program is that you become aware, or I have become more aware, that people may be speaking English, but they may not be understanding the English as I understand it. And therefore you have to be prepared to do a lot of differentiation and different ways in which you explain what is needed, and how you get into supporting someone who believes they speak English well, but in actual fact miss the nuances of the language. And so that's part of the sort of diplomatic side of being a PAT. But certainly the support for students who are experiencing some form of mental health illness is there. And I've done a couple of referrals for students there, and they have felt very grateful that it has been recognised. I am aware, though, that there are services that I'm not aware of, if you see what I mean. So as a PAT, one of the things I tell people is you've got to know the program requirements, but now I think as a PAT, you've also got to know what the services are, what services. If you have a student who is dyslexic, if you have a student who has sight impairment, if you have a student who is struggling with depression or struggling in some form of mental health, you've got to be aware of who to direct them to, not just the service, but it's helpful often to have a name of a person who that student can directly contact, because just emailing, a bland department title is quite intimidating for students. If they've got a name, they can. And in those cases, often I have contacted the person and said, you're going to hear from this person. So the student feels as if they are already known, and it eases them in terms of that contact. Particularly if they are working internationally, it's one of those moments when the distance is the largest. There are times when working with my students on Teams, the distance between us is very small. But sometimes when you're dealing with a problem, when it's personal, that person is feeling quite isolated and the distance is larger. So I think part of the personal bit of being a PAT is to make sure that you can support somebody accessing into the support that's available at the university, and assure your students that the university isn't this sort of faceless organisation in Sunderland, but is actual fact people there to support them.
The last thing really is it's about anything. Well, I was going to say it's the key to your success, or anything else you'd like to add.
Well, I had to answer some questions about being a PAT for Tony Kerr, so it's different. So I actually thought about this. What would I tell a new PAT to make sure that they were a bit aware of what the job entailed, and certainly knowing what the program requirements are, and that working with my team, the module leaders and the the program leaders, that has been excellent in the education department in terms of unpicking what's required and the clarity of that has come through, and the material that they have produced for students. But it still means you as a PAT, you've got to unpick that and analyze it often for students who, as I've said previously, English isn't their first language. So sometimes nuances are lost. So you have to know what the requirements are and the expectations. What are students expected to do in this assignment, or expected to do in terms of this activity? Certainly, I think as a PAT, you have to be aware of students' personal as well as professional situation. So engaging in conversation, and then I keep a record. I have a book with name of all the students and the information that I've gleaned about them. So you know, are they with children? Are they married? Where they live? You know, in terms of their circumstances, are they in a hostel? Some of the international students in boarding schools are living in the boarding school. So when they were in lockdown, there was sort of a double whammy. Not only were they on lockdown, but they were in lockdown with their students in some cases, and therefore they found some of that was very, very stressful. So you've got to be know those that's element of them, because you've got to be realistic about solutions. If they've got a problem, you can't suggest something if it's not possible. So you've got to be able to support them in managing themselves within their context. One of the things that my students have given me feedback about is that they found it refreshing in my teams meetings with them that I shared parts of my own life, and that was often in terms of anecdotes of my teaching experience, reassuring them of some of the experiences that they had, but also in terms of my own life. I told funny stories about what my grandchildren were doing, and my negative experiences of online dating. Anything to make a laugh, really, in terms of lightening, but also to encourage them to see that there's a wider life. I'm always concerned with students who have only their qualification. I know it's very intense, but they've got to sort of keep a view of that there is a life outside. So several of them have commented that they found that refreshing when they on the Teams meetings, because it sort of broke the intensity. So yes, it's about common experiences. I mean, the fact is that I've had conversations with people in Bangalore about the difficulties of Amazon delivery. There's a lot of commonality. We discovered in one team meeting that we're all wearing the same blue masks. So that it's all very, again, it's about common experience. So in teaching and learning, it reassures students that what they're going through is what other people are also going through, and it breaks down the isolation. Certainly, for me, I came into education to make a difference, and I always quote, there was a play years ago that I saw about a teacher, and it's about teaching has the ability that you have the capacity as a teacher to make somebody else's life extraordinary. And therefore, with my students, that's where I go. So to get them through to the qualification that will change their life, make their life different. So you have to be prepared to reassure, praise, prompt, negotiate, nag, anything that gets them across the line. And that is always something that has been part of my work, right from working with primary children to FE students to HE students. As a student, you want to be able to trust your tutor that they want you to achieve, they want you to succeed. So as a PAT, that's what I think is a major part of the role. Saying that, you have to be proactive in monitoring contact with the student. So I keep track of who I've heard from, who I haven't heard from, and I prompt just a short hello, how are you? I haven't heard from you for a while. you know, are you okay? So I keep track. So I hear about my, you know, make contact with my students. But one of the things that has worked this year, in actual fact, has been clearer about boundaries. And it was something that the program leaders were very keen that we did. The holiday periods were recognised, and also weekends. So my students knew that I would not be answering emails after 4 o'clock on a Friday until 9 o'clock on a Monday. And that proved to be quite powerful for them organising their time when they could contact me. But it was also important for me. It meant I had a break, because you do deal with a lot of emails and contact. The other thing is to remember that you're not an assistant. You're not an admin assistant. So if there's something that your students ask you about and you know it's in the module handbook, you do them a disservice if you give them all the answers. You have to constantly get them to engage with the module handbooks, because the information is there, and students can be monitored. They can be checked. Are they using the course material? And part of your job as a PAT is constantly to be saying to them, use the course material, because it's quality and they get all the answers. So don't set yourself up as an admin assistant. And be prepared. My last point was about be prepared to practice the differentiation. All your students learn in different ways. And part of my course looked at learning styles. So that also led into discussions with the students about their own learning styles. It wasn't something just theory, it was also in terms of practice. But it does mean that you've got to have an idea of when you're advising or cajoling or nagging or praising, you're making it relevant to them in terms of how they organize. Like every learner, from tiny little student to, you know, grown-ups in HE, people like to think or like to be reassured that their tutors know them and that they are individual, that their tutors see them as people, not just as a name on a register or a face on a screen. So be prepared to pay attention, I think, to your students as real learners.
Lovely. Excellent. Thank you very much, Leslie.
Okay.